Hi, my name is Della Tony, and I'm a nurse who has been working with COVID patients for the last 2 months. Infectious diseases have been my hobby for over 20 years, from the moment I first heard about Ebola, that a little microscopic packet of RNA could do such damage to large, complex, and advanced life forms still boggles my mind. My hobby includes getting daily field reports from epidemiologists around the world on all types of pathogens involving plants and animals, so it is only natural I would pick a virus, Spanish flu, to offer you information about. A little over 100 years ago, Spanish flu swept the globe in one very long, devastating year. In this presentation, I will provide a brief history of Spanish flu, some basic information about the virus that caused it, and conclude by incorporating similarities between this pandemic 100 years ago and our pandemic today. It is my hope that altogether this information will help you understand the difficulties of managing a pandemic on a community level and on a global scale. Contrary to its name, Spanish flu didn't actually originate in Spain. In March 1918, the first report of a rapidly spreading flu came out of Kansas. At the time, Americans were fighting in World War I, and Camp Funston in Kansas became the historical focal point of these initial flu reports. Although many soldiers became sick, few of them died, and deployments and troop movements continued on as usual. As a result, thousands of sick soldiers, packed into rail cars, traversed America on their trek to the East Coast, where they boarded warships headed to the European front. During the Leviathan's cross-Atlantic voyage, soldiers actually mutinied and refused to go below decks due to the number of illnesses and deaths from the flu. As the Leviathan reached the European coast, it was reported the decks, quote, became wet and slippery with blood, unquote. And this was only round one of Spanish flu. There were 3 rounds of Spanish flu between January 1918 and September 1919, the first serving as a sort of warning when we look in hindsight. Historically, it is virtually impossible to pinpoint when the virus mutated to such a degree as to kill 50 to 100 million people globally, but certainly soldiers crowded into ships, barracks, and on the war front likely helped things along. Upon arrival by American troops, the flu rapidly spread across battlefields, infecting foe and friend alike. The UK media finally picked up on it as Spain began reporting many deaths related to the flu, and from that point on, the world dubbed it Spanish flu. As American troops arrived home in August and September of 1918, they brought with them the second and deadliest round of flu. Symptoms included fever, body aches, cough, headache, and weakness. The lucky died quickly from viral pneumonia. The unlucky would seem to recover only to be stricken several days later with bacterial pneumonia and die. Autopsies revealed many died of suffocation due to blood-filled lungs. Cyanosis, or bluing of the skin, due to lack of oxygen to the extremities, was considered a sign of severe infection and impending death. Physicians often reported their patients were so dark it was, quote, hard to distinguish the colored men from the white, unquote, labeling Spanish flu as the purple death. Weakened survivors of the second round of the flu often succumbed to the purple death during the third round of Spanish flu, beginning in the winter of 1918 and lasting until the end of summer 1919. The government and public alike were taken completely surprised during this pandemic, and containment methods were mixed. While some cities initiated fairly immediate quarantine measures, such as social distancing, the closure of schools and workplaces, and limitations on gatherings, other cities continued business as usual, keeping schools and businesses open, holding revivals and other large church events, and even hosting welcome home parades for soldiers with thousands in attendance. In hindsight, the timing of containment measures clearly show which cities were worst hit by Spanish flu. New York City enforced strict quarantine measures on September 19, 1918, before any flu cases were reported in their city. As a result, they had the lowest death rate from Spanish flu of all the East Coast cities. Conversely, Pittsburgh did not implement quarantine measures until the flu had struck their city, closing schools in October and banning public gatherings in November. As a brutal consequence, it was one of the eastern cities with the highest death toll from Spanish flu. Upon easing quarantine measures, the majority of large cities across America were required to reinstitute restrictions as the flu reemerged and peaked again during its third and final wave. Chaos ensued as well when it came to treatments. Antibiotics and antivirals to cure bacterial pneumonia or ease flu symptoms had yet to be discovered. Physicians turned to a variety of treatments, mostly to provide relief, such as aspirin, injecting oxygen under the skin, and creating cinnamon milk beverages. Some physicians prescribed alcohol in hopes of detoxing the body from the offending flu organism, and as a result, alcohol became available only by prescription during this time. With a loss of confidence in authorities due to rapid spread and death through their communities, some people desperate to save their loved ones took even more drastic approaches. Folk remedies included apple cider vinegar, necklaces of garlic and onions, mouth spray concoctions of camphor and menthol, gargling with a variety of elixirs including chlorinated soda, yes, bleach and soda together, and dousing their fires with sulfur and brown sugar with a house shutter to allow its inhabitants to breathe the smoke and purify themselves. The color red was quite popular, as many believed it warded off the devil that brought the sickness. Wearing red and eating or stewing hot peppers were common remedy choices during this time. These treatments did little to assist in survival of the flu in the short term, as is usual for even modern viral outbreaks. Long-term effects of surviving the flu, as evidenced through retroactive studies, showed adults exposed in the uterus during the second and third waves of the virus had statistically significant spikes in heart disease, diabetes, and kidney disease compared to adults born in the years prior to and after the Spanish flu. Additionally, there was a downward trend in high school graduation for babies in utero during the Spanish flu. High school graduation was on an upward trend in the periods of graduation of children born before and after the Spanish flu. While long-term effects of some viruses, such as microcephaly and Zika virus, are readily evident, the little data we have to date on long-term effects of pandemics are pretty much limited to the lifetimes of people born during the Spanish flu and tend to raise more questions than answers to this day. But one question was definitely answered fairly soon after the Spanish flu pandemic. For over 10 years, the belief had been that Spanish flu was caused by bacteria. In 1930, virologist Richard Shope was able to finally isolate the virus in a lab. And what exactly is a virus? It's actually quite simple. Some RNA strands with a surrounding protein shell that has little receptors or antennae sticking out of it. Some viruses land on a cell like a space capsule and inject their RNA, which gives our immune system a cue that an alien invader has arrived. Others, like the Spanish flu, use their special receptors to mimic our natural body responses and sort of melt into the cell, leaving no trace of themselves behind. Viruses then hold a cell hostage while they replicate exponentially, oftentimes killing the host cell as the new batch of viruses burst out to attack other cells. Spanish flu, in particular, uses its receptors to bind and melt into cells, initially in our throat and lungs. As it replicates and exits the cell, it destroys it and searches for new cells to bind to. Spanish flu's affinity for respiratory and lung cells ended up being the primary death sentence for most people. The most important discovery about the Spanish flu came almost 80 years after the pandemic, when in 2005, Dr. Tumpey from the CDC single-handedly sequenced the genome or recipe of the virus, which came to be known in the medical field as H1N1 influenza subtype A. Through genotyping, we have been able to devise a family tree for H1N1 and to determine it is a zoonotic virus, meaning it originates from animals such as geese, pigs, cattle, birds, and people. Viruses have the capability to mutate by adaptation in order to survive within the host they are infecting, and sometimes the creature shows no symptoms, making it very difficult for humans to keep track of without constant testing and surveillance of animals. Along with this sneaky tactic, during the process of passing between living creatures, H1N1 and other viruses can also reassort with other variations of H1N1 already present in their new host, as exemplified during the swine flu epidemic of 2009. Another H1N1 virus, where genetic sequencing showed at least three reassortments with other subtypes of H1N1 viruses. These reassortments, adaptive mutations, and potential random mutations that occur as H1N1 passes from human to bird to pig back to human, for example, not only create an infinite number of different virus subtypes within the same family, it makes it difficult for us to predict which flu subtypes we might see in the next flu season or how potent it might be, which in turn makes it next to impossible to create adequate vaccine coverage. It is for this reason it is recommended you get a flu shot every year. For example, because a family member of the 2009 H1N1 swine flu was one of the components of a flu vaccine in the 1970s, many in the US did not get the severe form of flu. Nonetheless, Spanish flu has ended up being the gift that just keeps on giving as we continue to suffer from its distant H1N1 cousins still circulating, mutating, and infecting us to this day. These infectious disease basics revolving around viruses and hindsight research after the 1918-1919 pandemic are really all that we have to base our decisions on during today's pandemic, tying together the general similarities between Spanish flu and COVID-19 may explain some of the chaos we face as a nation and as a global population. Both Spanish flu and COVID-19 are zoonotic viruses, both with a history of reassorting and/or adaptively mutating depending on the creature they infect. Similarly, we have yet to find a definitive treatment or cure for viruses of any type, and we still possess only puzzle piece understanding based on our growing but limited knowledge of how RNA or even DNA functions to sustain life on any level. While COVID survivors may feel great about beating this virus, the jury will be out for the rest of their lifetime until we can determine what the long-term effects are of this virus entering our bodies, as we discovered exist with Spanish flu survivors. Today, thankfully, there is no world war occurring during our pandemic, but still, our lives by default of our current massive population end up quite similar to the days of Spanish flu. As a global society, we pack ourselves on airplanes to travel, frequent crowded amusement parks or concerts, and ride highly populated subway systems, all ideal nesting spots for the virus transmission and mutation. While we have begrudgingly participated in quarantine measures for a couple of months in the United States, other countries such as Brazil maintain a so what attitude. Preliminary data on infection versus death rate from COVID 19 in Brazil, while they exercise this so what attitude, is around 6%. If Puget Sound had decided to implement the so what policy in March instead of quarantine measures, a minimum of 250,000 of our 4 million Pacific Northwesters would likely be dead today, mimicking the death rates occurring in cities, ignoring or haphazardly utilizing quarantine measures during the Spanish flu. Lastly, and of most concern, if the Spanish flu is any indication of the staying power of a virus in our human population, and if we don't continue to be very careful with tracking and containing COVID 19, what will happen next? If the Spanish flu, a virus with many similarities to COVID 19, is any indication, there is a very real potential for round 2 and 3 to be quite terrible indeed. Hopefully, this speech has left you with an understanding of the types of complexities under consideration by our most esteemed medical experts, biostatisticians, and public health officials. Complexities they are working around the clock to provide solutions for day by day and even moment by moment during our current pandemic. May you all stay well. Thank you so much for your time, and please feel free to email me with any questions or comments you have via Canvas.